So I think we're getting most of the people now, and others will join in. This is going to be recorded. In fact, we're recording now. I want to thank Chris for doing the recording and the editing, and introduce the other Chris. We got a lot of Chris's on here today. And I want to introduce Chris Zappa, who's given a previous Earth2Class program. We're going to start off with a short introduction that I'm going to provide, and then I'll turn it over to him. Okay, so today we're talking about bringing scientific and indigenous communities together to study sea ice change in the Arctic Alaska. The area that Chris is going to be talking about is up here in this part of Alaska, Northwest Alaska. And you have a picture of the bay behind him. It's not live because of the time difference. But since most of us are not that familiar with Alaska, these are the main indigenous groups. I'm going to try to avoid mispronouncing names. Chris, is it Inupiaq?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this is the Bay Area, and the people up here are part of the Inupiaq indigenous groups. How do you get your food? Well, for many of us, home market. This was the original Whole Foods market in Texas. But many people still are hunters and gatherers. And in that area, they've noticed that the blueberries are coming earlier and the salmon are coming later. Result is that they're having a problem trying to get both of the foods because of the changes in climate. The local groceries mainly carry box foods with little fresh meat or fruits. So people are noticing that the salmon are arriving about the same time the blueberries, and since it's limited power to pick things, it's getting difficult to get both simultaneously. Another problem they're having is coastal erosion. And so I want to share with you now a little bit of information about Alaska from the National Climate Assessment. About every 5 years, the government does a national climate assessment. And it summarizes the impact of climate change on the United States. Excellent source for information. One of the things they found is Alaska is warming about twice as fast as the rest of the nation, with widespread impacts. The sea ice is rapidly receding, glaciers are shrinking, permafrost is thawing, so there's more wildfires, which affects the infrastructure and wildlife habitat. Ocean temperatures are rising, which produces acidification, which also alters the valuable marine fisheries. Summer sea ice is receding faster than previously projected, may disappear by the mid-20th or mid-century. This is altering marine ecosystems, leading to greater ship access, offshore development opportunities, increased vulnerability to coastal erosion. Many of the glaciers are shrinking substantially. This has impacts on the hydropower, ocean circulation patterns, fisheries, and global sea level rise. We're seeing here that basically since the 1980s, the temperature has changed in Alaska greatly. Here are some images of some of the coastal erosion effects. And here's the satellite imagery that shows some of the impacts of the changes on sea ice. Well, the last slide, if you do the show, is a little video that you can go to on your own. So I'm going to stop my sharing. Give me a moment and I will. Chris, you're the co-host now, so you can share your screen. And
thanks for having me here again, inviting me back, Mike. I enjoyed the first time. Hopefully everyone will
glad you can join us
the second time. I'd like to share with you today this project that we did, a group of us in Alaska, and it's called Ikavik Sikukun, which means ice bridges in Inupiaq. And the goal of the project is bridging scientific and indigenous communities to study sea ice change in Arctic Alaska. And it's funded by the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation. And there's a host of team members from the University of Alaska Fairbanks, the native village of Kotzebue, Lamont Doherty. We had a documentarian from Farthest North Films, and the Fish and Wildlife Service was a great help in our field work. And we also had a few student from the University of Washington who was doing her thesis on the marine mammal part of this project. Mm-hmm. There we go. So I think hopefully, well, it's been observed over the last 30, 40 years that sea ice thickness in the Arctic, among other things, sea ice thickness has decreased substantially. This picture is just till 2015. It's continued to kind of decrease since then. But this has and I mentioned sea ice thickness specifically because it has an impact on how local indigenous communities, it impacts indigenous communities, not only, as Mike mentioned, coastal erosion, but it also impacts marine mammals and subsistence living. So this is a picture of Kotzebue here. This is the village. This is the sound to the left. And you see this open water here. This is, oops, let me go back. This is the channel. So when I refer to the channel, that's what I mean. It's the river channel. And that is the life, part of the whole process of that opening up is impacts various hunt seasons. And when I'm referring to hunt seasons, I'm specifically referring to seal hunts. So they have two seal populations that they hunt, and they have very different habitats that they live in and seasonal traits, meaning when they like to come into the sound and when they don't. The two are the ring seals. One is, and that's the local name is Natchik, and the other one are bearded seals, and those are Ugruk. So I'm going to mention those two throughout the talk. And the difference between the two, the ring seals, they like to den when the ice is solid. So they like to build dens on the landfast ice in the sound. The bearded seals just like to sunbathe so they only come into the sound when the ice breaks up. So the ring seals like the landfast ice nice and solid, so they can den, but once it breaks up, they kind of scatter, and the bearded seals come in. I don't think they don't prey on each other. at all. It's just a natural way that their habitats evolve, although their habitats are changing rapidly. So this project, as I mentioned, is the Coon Project. And what's unique about this project is that when I normally write a proposal to do a project, I propose to NSF with my hypotheses from my perspective, what I think is important. The unique thing about this project is that we developed those questions with the community from the beginning. So the Moore Foundation allowed us to, or funded us to specifically go in with a blank slate and work with the community themselves to design the research. So it was a community-based approach. And this project has underscored the value of Indigenous partnerships. And it highlights, I'm also going to highlight the answers, or some answers to community-driven research questions that we developed in this project. So as I mentioned, it's a community-based research design. So it begins with the community engagement. So before the research questions have even been defined, and this ensures that our observing plan meets the science, the community, and the legacy goals all together. So what do I mean by the science? So we develop a research plan that we have a panel of elders and advisory council. So elders in the Indigenous community. We spent a number of days in the room, in a room in Kotzebue, multiple times throughout the year, just discussing what's interesting or what's of interest to the advisory council and what's important at this point. What do they want to understand, why things are happening, what's going on. And then from that, so that's the community-based research. And then we develop the science questions that we want to ask. And in the long term, we want to have a legacy so that we can document this for this approach to not only in this community, but other communities. So we develop the research questions, we make the science observations, and then we engage the community. And we have, as I mentioned, we have a film and video documentation of this throughout. And I'll give you we have 15 short films on the project. I'm not going to show them. You can look at them on your own time, but they're about 10 minutes each, less than 10 minutes each. But they really give a beautiful overview of all the details of of the project. And I really urge you to go view those at your leisure later. So the group is, as I mentioned, the Indigenous Expert Advisory Council, which was Cyrus Harris, John Goodwin, Bobby Schaefer, and Ross Schaefer. And they're all lived in Kotzebue their whole life. There was a Columbia University group, myself, Ajit Subramaniam, who gave a talk on another one of our projects near Fiji earlier this year. Nathan Loxog, who's a postdoc, now he's moved on to the University of New Hampshire, and Carson Whitty, who's one of my current PhD students. Our colleague in the native village of Kotzebue was Alex Whiting. The documentarian was Sarah Betcher. I mentioned the graduate student from Washington, that's Jessica Lindsay, who's working on marine mammals. And at Alaska Fairbanks, Andy Mahoney is our CIS geophysicist, and Donna is our lead marine mammal person, PI. And Kate started on the project early and did a master's on CIS geophysics with Andy.
Chris, let me stop for a moment because I just got a message that apparently they may not have upgraded me to Zoom Pro and that this session may suddenly cut off.
Okay, and then I'll just start back up.
We need to get another link.
You can't just use the same, I think you can use the same link.
Okay, we'll try it.
So I'll just pop back on the same link and when we get cut off.
Okay.
Alrighty. So the project objectives were this from a science point of view, improve our understanding of improve our understanding of the mechanism, impacts, and implications of sea ice retreat in how it impacts the local community. Develop partnerships between scientists and local residents to increase the capacity of local communities to address research needs. And then the legacy is to document the progress of this project as a potential model for future community-based collaborative work. So the value of Indigenous partnerships. The Advisory Council plays multiple roles. One, they're knowledge holders, and two, they're enablers of new knowledge. That's a little early, right? So the co-production of our research questions, as I mentioned, we went to Kotzebue. So here's two of the PIs along with the three of the Indigenous Advisory Council members. So we do interviews with the community members, so there's an exchange of knowledge. And as I mentioned, the Advisory Council are both knowledge holders and they enable new knowledge. So this was the end result of our multiple weeks or trips to Kotzebue. We had a whiteboard and we would doodle on the board, draw maps, schematic drawings, and then come up with questions that were interested to the Advisory Council. And so here's a list of the questions. I will, rather than try and read those, I'll put them up here. Why we started with 0 was, I think, no, question 1 was the first question, and rather than renumber them all, we just made the first question actually question 0. But these are the 6 questions that we came up with, or that the Advisory Council came up with. And I just want to focus in on a few of them. And actually when we actually went, so we developed the questions the first year in 2017. And then when we actually went to the field to make measurements in the 2018 and 2019, it was really an anomalous year. So we added a question, which was, why is there so little sea ice? And I'll get to that in a bit. So the evolving science plan is the co-production of research questions with the local community elders. This allowed us to form hypotheses more efficiently, and it also grounds the work in interest of the local stakeholders. So this picture here, I just want to highlight this picture. This is one of our open houses with local community members. And one of the things we use innovatively on this project are these drones here you see in the foreground. And I'll talk more about those, but they're really one of the usefulness of using drones in this project was that the ice eventually becomes unsafe to go out on and make measurements. So the drones allow us to go out, continue to make measurements and make observations as the whole habitat is changing. So one of the questions that's critical to the community is, what environmental factors control marine mammal use of Kotzebue Sound? So as I mentioned, bearded seals, they require the opening to form before they can even enter the sound. So the ice has to break up for those bearded seals to come in. So it's not clear how much open water they need, and the sequence of events typically leading to breakup of the ice is also unclear. So those are kind of some of the things we wanted to understand. So it requires an understanding of local mechanisms promoting ice fracture and movement, as well as sea ice use by different species. And I want to just highlight here, remember I pointed to the channel, I mentioned that channel in the first picture from over Kotzebue. Here's Kotzebue, and here's that channel opening right here. So that's the ice is already opened up, and this channel is flowing through. And this channel is directly related to 2 rivers I'll mention a little later. I'll show you a map of that. But this is the river channel that comes through, and that river channel is what drives this opening. So I'm giving away the answer right from the beginning, but I'll show you why later. So another question is, what environmental factors control the length of the bearded seal season? So as I mentioned, the bearded seals can't come into the sound until it breaks up. But so that requires the channel through the landfast ice to reach the loose ice, so that the boats can get out. So not only does the sound have to break up from out here, out on the outer edge here, but that channel has to open up so that the local community members can get out on their boats to where the seals are, because the seals are just kind of, as I mentioned, sunbathing on the broken up ice. So they need to get on their boats to be able to get out there. So that channel has to break up for them to get out to where the seals are, as opposed to the ring seals, which they need to have the ice solid so that they can actually walk out to where the ring seals are in their dens, because the ring seals aren't there once this ice breaks up. So this is just I'm going to come back to this later, but this is one of the main questions. How has the ugric hunting season changed? So in the past, the ice would break up. They would be able to have the ice would break up so that the seals could come in, but it would remain enough. There was enough sea ice there so that the season would last a long time. The river would break up so they could get out to where they were easily. Now the sea ice breaks up and there's hardly any ice, and there's much longer trips, and there's fewer, much harder to find or get to and get out on the ice pack where the seals are. So just an early summary of what the project is, or what some takeaway messages are. If you're doing these kinds of projects, early community engagement promotes effective integration of Indigenous knowledge. So you want to engage early and engage often. And Indigenous knowledge holders can enable new knowledge through the co-design of these hypotheses. So the questions that we developed are questions we would never think to ask. And also the co-produced knowledge must be shared. And a very important part of the life in Kotzebue and other local communities is story time, which is very important, sharing of that knowledge. So that's kind of a broad overview of how we did the project and how we developed the questions we wanted to ask. So I wanted to give a little bit. So there's Kotzebue. We're gonna zoom out. There's all the members that are helping out. So first question we want to ask: what determines ice transport processes in the sound? So this is a picture of the sea ice for the last, I don't know, what it typically looks like in the sound. So you see it's typically full of ice in the sound in early April. And the ice edge is out here at the mouth of the sound. Remember, Kotzebue's in here. So when we go to 2018, when we were there, same dates, early April, there's hardly any ice in the sound. It already broken up. And the same thing in 2019.